Welcome to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. We introduce you to the voices of community thought leaders and change makers who are working on solutions that face our fellow individual community members, neighborhoods, cities, and our region. This is George Koster, your host. This episode is part of our series exploring COVID-19's impact on nonprofits and small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area. Back in April of 2020, when we decided to create this ongoing series on COVID-19's impact, first on nonprofits and then on small businesses in the San Francisco Bay Area, we, like you, had no idea how long the pandemic would go on and what the health and economic impact would be in our community. Going into 2021, the pandemic is now killing more people, shutting down more nonprofits and small businesses, along with wiping out the livelihoods of families, neighborhoods, and communities. We will continue to shine a spotlight on the nonprofits and small businesses that make up the fabric of our community, along with the founders and staff who are struggling to deal with the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on their operations, services, and sustainability until we can all get to the other side of the pandemic. Along the way, we will also share with you all the amazing solutions that our nonprofits, small businesses, foundations, and government leaders are working on to help us all get to the other side of the pandemic and come together to rebuild our communities with more economic, social, and environmental equality.
I'm so fortunate to have these people in my life who have shaped my approach to public service. Not all of us can be so lucky. Not all of us can rest at night knowing that the love and care we hope for, that we know is such an essential part of a productive and successful life, will be there for us when we need it most. It's that awareness and those values, principles, and ethics that my family has instilled in me that carry me through the toughest times, through the hardest of life's challenges. When I called out for help, not knowing what a future could be, not knowing if one even existed for me, it was my family that heard my call. It's that care, our shared values, our principles, and ethics that I've worked to infuse in my 11 years of public service to this city. They've given me the confidence and strength to know with every shred of my being that our communities need to be listened to, that they need to be heard. And it's those values I will bring to this new role as Assessor-Recorder. These are the values we need always, but especially today, when people are hurting so badly, so deeply, when they need and deserve to know there is a government for them that is caring and not callous, with doors that are open and not shut, a government that is accessible, effective, and accountable to you, the people that we are proud to serve.
This is the swearing-in ceremony of Joaquin Torres as the new San Francisco Assessor-Recorder. Over the year plus of producing the special series on the combination of the COVID-19 pandemic and economic crash that followed, we've been exploring its impact on our nonprofit and small business sectors. In episode 50, we featured the voices of local government leaders Rebecca Woodbury and Kelly Parmley, along with civic innovator Judy Brown, to provide us insights into the pandemic's impact on our local government. We wanted to do a deeper dive into how the pandemic and economic crash has impacted the city of San Francisco's ability to provide services to our community members. In this special hour-long episode, we wanted to focus on the City and County of San Francisco's Office of Economic and Workforce Development. The Office of Economic and Workforce Development is one of the city government departments that has a unique mission of working across multiple sectors in our community, from economic and community development to workforce training, community benefits, and housing. To accomplish our goal of this deep dive in this episode, we feature the voice of Joaquin Torres, who over the past decade plus has been working in the center of all the intersections of the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I'm joined remotely by Joaquin Torres, the former director of the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development, who was appointed in January of 2021 by Mayor Breed as the new Assessor-Recorder of the San Francisco Office of the Assessor-Recorder. Joaquin, welcome to Voices of the Community.
Thanks so much for having me, George.
I really wanted to have you on the show because you've been working in economic and workforce development along with affordable housing for a while now. And these are the three big areas that have been impacted the most by COVID-19. So I think it would be really wonderful if you could just provide the audience, as we were talking before we came on, just that I've known you for a while in the background, but I think it would be great if you can talk a little bit about your background working with the Housing Authority and then moving over into the whole Invest in Our Neighborhoods program. And then, of course, I want to ask you about your love of the arts community as well.
Yeah, thanks, George. Well, my name is Joaquin Torres, and I'm the Assessor-Recorder for the City and County of San Francisco. I was very, very fortunate to be appointed, as you mentioned, by Mayor London Breed, sworn in on February 8th. And I've been diving into the world of assessing and recording and taking a very intricate series of steps away from about an 11-year career, primarily in one department in the city and county, and that was the Office of Economic and Workforce Development, a place that had always attracted me since I joined the city back in 2009, working first for Mayor Gavin Newsom as a district liaison to the Latino community, Native American communities, and districts 9, 8, and 11, supervisorial districts in the city. For the perspective of people today, that means Supervisor Mandelman's district from today, or Supervisor Hillary Ronan's district today, and Supervisor Asha Safai's district today. When I joined the city, that was David Campos, who's now Chief of Staff to Chesa Boudin, District Attorney Boudin, as well as the head of the Democratic County Central Committee, and then, of course, John Avalos is Supervisor in District 11, and Bevan Dufty at the time in District 8 back when I started. So a lot has changed. But so many of the issues that we were talking about back then that might have been considered on the fringe are front and center in every single discussion, every single article, every single news clipping, story, arts programming, lectures, webinars that we see today. And I think that's been very interesting for me over time, moving through those years of working for Gavin Newsom, then beginning the Invest in Neighborhoods initiative under Mayor Lee after I was serving as his Director of Neighborhood Services. That constituent direct service work that I was doing at that time when I first started. And then I was tasked with leading that Invest in Neighborhoods initiative and really focusing on, during that time and that recovery, the importance of reinforcing the identity of our commercial corridors that, whether we recognize it or not, establish the character and really are the lifeblood of our city's character, economic force, cultural force throughout the city. And then through that work, then had London Breed tap me to lead that office, which was an extraordinary honor. And within about a year and a half of doing that work, we were smacked and submerged into a totally disoriented world that we're just beginning to come out of and starting to see some light on, which is our coronavirus experience. And that is putting it very lightly, but it's been an extraordinary training leading up to that moment during this time. So, I feel very, very lucky and very fortunate that I've been able to do this work. And a big shout out to all the people that I've worked with at OEWD. They've been absolutely amazing throughout this pandemic, doing everything they can to serve, not only through the auspices of our office, but because of how good we are and how good those people are. They were tasked with joining what's called the COVID Command Center to help out with testing, community-based programming, community-based services, dealing with the most basic issues like hunger during this time in our disenfranchised communities, primarily our communities of color, and also supporting the vaccination efforts, all in reinforcing those community-based models that have been essential to serving people during this time of extreme need. It's grounded everything that we've done. And what I'm very proud of is that even before we had an Office of Racial Equity, that was the ethos that I strove to bring to the body of work, any body of work that I was touching under any mayor, with a great group of colleagues that would help me realize that. The other element on my volunteer time, as you mentioned, was my work as president of the Housing Authority Commission, which I'm still doing right now for a short time longer, and helping to revitalize public housing in a way that no one thought was possible. It really was the brainchild of Mayor Ed Lee, together with then Supervisor London Breed, now Mayor London Breed, and Olson Lee, who was the director of the Mayor's Office of Housing at that time, to bring in a $2 billion program in partnership with Bank of America, who provided the financing, and an assortment of extremely committed nonprofit providers to rehabilitate extraordinarily dilapidated housing for families, for seniors, for those with disabilities, and to be able to see that realized. We still have some ribbons to cut the moment we come out of COVID to celebrate that. Most specifically, I think some of the last milestones are the Ping Yun developments in Chinatown, which is actually where, as many people know or maybe remember, is where Ed Lee got his start in filing lawsuits against the housing authority.
Those two buildings were really the worst structures that were there. And I think just to provide listeners some context, this was during the time that, Public Housing Authority in San Francisco the leader was under investigation, and there was all these stories about broken down buildings, et cetera. And so this was a unique model in that HUD called it a pilot, which I always love that term because under the guise of a pilot, you can do all kinds of things that normally people don't allow, if you will, because you can think outside the box. And I think that the city's done an amazing job. And I'll let you talk more about the whole unique model of using federal funds and the nonprofit sector to work together to essentially reinvent public housing in San Francisco.
Yeah, it was a complete reinvention. And I think when we say city, it's with a capital C because it includes those community partners and those nonprofits who, if they had not come to the table, this vision could not have been realized. Whether you talk about Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Center or Chinatown Community Development Center, or you talk about the Tabernacle Development Group or others, you don't see the revitalization that we are realizing today. And also the partnership that we had with labor to help us get there. It was a long, treacherous road that began in controversy, and we were so lucky that Mayor Lee put us on that commission to help make this possible. As I was telling you before, I think it's like one of the most fulfilling experiences I've had in my life, and there's still so much more to do. But the fact that people were not receiving the most basic elemental conditions in which to live their lives in their homes, raise their families, relax after work, or live out their days was an embarrassment. And being able to correct those basic things. And for a long time, I had a hard time with the mission of, decent housing, but in many instances, decent housing where people can really live. And sometimes it's a very long stretch from where they are living in a moment. And to be able to change that was extremely powerful and fulfilling.
So we're going to dive back into invest in neighborhoods only because, as we were saying before we came on, so much the model of the old Treasury Department's Main Street program. But I feel like people don't understand the importance of commercial corridors, because commercial corridors is kind of a technical term for really what most people think of their neighborhood commercial strip, right? Where all their restaurants and stores are. So talk a little bit about the importance, the power of a commercial corridor, the merchants associations around it, and then benefit districts, because under your work and the work around SFOEWD, the whole benefits district really also exploded.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the infrastructure necessary for any neighborhood to be successful, whether it's a neighborhood that has the capacity of a merchant organization or a merchant and neighbors and residents association, or something a bit more sustained in terms of its financial modeling, made possible by property assessments that are self-applied, that then support basic services, cleaning, marketing, banners, etc., that help fulfill a variety of visionary needs that a community defines for themselves and realizes for themselves through benefit districts, improvement districts at the smaller side, for your small merchant commercial corridors in all parts of the city, the areas that captured our imaginations when we visited another neighborhood and we said, well, what is this place? Why is it so special? It's because people were caring for it and curating it and partnering with each other together to make sure that there was an experience that people would have when they would visit those areas. I remember coming to visit Chinatown or North Beach or Cow Hollow or the outer Richmond or the outer Sunset and buying a kite with my dad in these places that seemed to come up out of nowhere. And that wasn't the case. Those were very intentional, invited, to a degree, organically curated spaces that eventually demanded some very serious investments and protections to ensure that they could thrive. So I think that when I began with Invest in Neighborhoods, the initial establishment of them was a very small group of community benefit districts, some of them substantial like the Moscone Improvement District or the Tourism Improvement District or Union Square Improvement District, those downtown areas, but then also areas like the Castro, and then one of the most significant ones that had been established in Civic Center and on Market Street as part of the revitalization that we were pursuing at the time. We call them now Mid-Market and Tenderloin and Civic Center, one of our opportunity neighborhoods like Chinatown, like the Mission, like the Excelsior, like the Bayview, like the Lower Fillmore, that helps us ground our work in very specific ways. And to a degree, it was taking that model that you were talking about in terms of that Main Street model and making it a little bit more particular and having a bit more community engagement in terms of what they called at the time SWOT analysis. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What are your opportunities? What are the threats to your identity, to your neighborhood, and so on? And we expanded it to 25 different neighborhoods at the time and built up relationships with people across those corridors, coordinated grants in each of those areas. And it really does provide a model for us on how we can serve the interests of our city in a neighborhood-based, community-based way. It doesn't have to be super planned. It can be very straightforward and simple, because usually that's what people want to see. And then there's other times when it has to get a bit more complicated, whether you're trying to establish a cultural district and create funding structures and create new organizations or foster new organizations that can draw down additional city funds and private funds, nonprofit funds, foundation funds, philanthropy to help serve your ultimate commercial corridor interests. So it was a fascinating experience to support the growth of that program over time and really build out an extraordinary staff that could serve a multitude of interests. And it was, I think it was probably one of the city's best kept and curated programs because we were so in tune, not only with the neighborhoods and designing programs that would meet their specific needs, but we partnered with the mayor, we partnered with the supervisors, we partnered with other agencies to make sure that we were coordinated and speaking with one voice, because that's the consistent work that needs to be done. And I think that's why so many of the Invest in Neighborhoods team members were asked to support the COVID response, because they had the experience of basing their work in community, allowing community to drive the ideas that would actually work to serve a community interest. That was important for testing. That was important for food security delivery, like we saw with the Mission Hub or out in the Bayview or at our public housing sites. That community really needed to lead those efforts. Here's where the need is. Here's who needs to be supported. Here are the small businesses that can be part of those efforts. And I think that some of the most innovative, if not the only innovative programs that we saw be successful was because the city listened to communities and neighbors and residents who had all the ideas quickly. And your small business entrepreneurs like your restaurants who were like, we got to figure something out if we're closed down. How do we have this triangulated approach to serving multiple interests that help allow our ecosystem to sustain itself through this crisis? You saw it in the Mission. You saw it in Chinatown with their food to fuel program to make sure that large banquet halls, which could no longer survive without all of that, number one, foot traffic, number two, tourism, and the consistent family and benevolent associations that would be able to visit them under normal conditions that could no longer do that. Where was that money going to come from? So people came together to figure out people needed to be fed, people needed to go to work. Where is the money going to come from? How can we repurpose investments to help serve these interests? How do we partner with philanthropy? All of that, I think, was strongly based in not only our San Francisco approach, but really Invest in Neighborhoods, because we'd had that practice.
And it seems like Invest in Neighborhoods is such a wonderful kind of foundational piece, a platform, if you will, by which the SFOEWD's efforts will help the city come back and all those small businesses, because it is really the intersection of so many things, right? There's your small business, your entrepreneurs, you have arts culture component of it. So there's the nonprofit, piece of it as well. There's all of the workforce around it that lives there. Invest in Neighborhoods also is part of your business attraction, retention, assistance, workforce. Those are all part of the pillars of your old department. So talk a little bit about SFOEWD for someone who's tuning in, like what the heck's the SFOEWD? Because everyone loves acronyms.
The Office of Economic and Workforce Development. I remember sitting in neighborhood services wondering what the hell is this thing that had at the time, and they're working on a branding change, but they had at the time a red and white logo, which was a bridge. And it was a Golden Gate Bridge. And I was always curious about who were these fascinating people that were dealing in the following areas. They were dealing with neighborhoods. They were dealing with general business development. So everything from your production, distribution, repairs, to your tech industry, to your biotech industry, your life sciences, to your permit delivery and permit support, the Office of Small Business, the Film Commission, and the Office of Film in San Francisco. The policy development that we were doing, the joint development in terms of pursuing development agreements to extract the greatest amount of community benefits of large development projects that we're seeking to be created in the city, whether you talk about Mission Bay or whether you talk about very specific large projects in Laurel Heights or all along the southeastern part of the city. That's joint development to ensure that we could have the highest level of inclusionary housing, the highest level of affordable housing, and all of the associated benefits, whether it's childcare centers, recreation centers, libraries, parks, open spaces, public spaces, and associated programming to make them real. And then finally, the reason why we do all this is not only to enliven our city and make it and keep it vibrant, but to create jobs. The most basic element of our work, to create jobs and create good paying jobs for people, and also create access and pathways for people to actually have the training available to them to get those jobs and sustain those positions. And then, of course, that's where the racial equity framework comes in throughout all of that work to ensure that you're reaching out and specifically investing your time, your energy, your awareness in those neighborhoods where the need is greatest. We used to, back in the day, talk about the 1.9% unemployment rate, the lowest unemployment rate that San Francisco has seen. And across the country, people would say we were the envy of the country because of how extraordinarily well we were doing. But of course, because we're San Franciscans, we wanted to think about the racial equity component as well, which meant that you had to pay attention to, even though you had that 1.9 unemployment rate pre-COVID again, that for the Black community, that rate was 3 times higher, that for the API and Latinx communities, 2 to 2.5 times higher. And so what could we do to enhance our programming to best serve those needs? At its best, government, and an office like the one that I used to lead at the Economic and Workforce Development, OEWD. And if you want to learn more, oewd.org. The government at its best is when you are providing those essential services for those who need them most. And that means getting into community and understanding exactly what are the wants, what are the needs, are the resources reaching those areas? Is it something that just looks good on paper? Or is it actually creating opportunity on the street? And is it recognized by community? All of that is the Office of Economic and Workforce Development. And I hope that the people that I've worked with in the past feel that we made a connection where they could feel that their government, which that office represents, reflected them, that they were really creating those programs of the office. So a lot to say. It's, fostering the economy, creating jobs, and doing that through a variety of industries in the city and county.
So we have been just talking about the importance of the multi-pronged approach of economic workforce development. So what would you say over your decade of work have been some of the biggest impact of OEWD's programs? There's business creation component. So there's that, right? Impact there, and then impact in workforce, which you were just saying a second ago, that on the front of it, it looks like, pre-COVID, we were doing wonderful. Now, during and post-COVID, we're going to be doing horrible. And we'll get into that towards the end of your lessons learned, et cetera. But what do you feel have been the big impacts of the programs? And then I'd love to have you share perhaps your favorite story of the years that you've been working there.
Oh, wow. Well, there's internal impacts, and then, of course, there are the external impacts. And I think both are important because you want to leave an organization in a place where it is in a place of ongoing and consistent and possible expansion and development. So, I led and grew the organization from a budget of around $67 million to almost $92 million when I departed. Being able to be in a leadership position and have that office be seen as one that could be a leader in relief and recovery for communities both large and small, for advancing our approach to racial equity in partnership with so many city agencies, deepening work in communities. So again, they could see themselves reflected and respected in the work that we were doing together, making sure that that was focused on the communities of color that most needed our city resources, advancing housing development in 7 major sites across the city, approvals of, nearly 10,000 units of housing with around 3,100 units of affordable housing included in those developments. The nonprofit sustainability initiative investing over $12 million to help nonprofits purchase their own space, build up their capacity, which supports, again, our overall vision for supporting those communities that are most in need. Creating the Invest in Neighborhoods program and seeing it thrive and seeing it seen as an extraordinary resource across the city to foster the identity of San Francisco. And I think what was kind of cool too was, welcoming the Matrix filming last year and putting San Francisco on a different kind of map as well before the pandemic. Now that was before the pandemic. And all the work that we did, especially around workforce development, creating youth programs through Opportunities for All, the mayor's initiative to make sure that every child could have access to first a summer job for the experience. And then we're reaching individual youth to make sure that they could have an opportunity, because so many of us take that for granted, but it has to be intentional in many communities if you want to see those opportunities taken advantage of. And then during the pandemic, I think what's been extraordinary is because we had the ability to know community. We had the experience of working deeply within community, understanding the bureaucracy of the city, that we could be a leader in recovery efforts and be asked to lend our time and our resources and our services and our people to supporting that recovery effort. I'm extremely proud of the fact that we specifically supported communities of color in San Francisco during this time. Not always perfect. We're certainly not done. The city has a lot of work to do, like so many others across the country do. But I think we should feel very proud about what we started. And now it's about following through on our commitment and doing that work. I'm very proud that our office was looked to support the mayor's redistribution of public safety funds within the Office of Economic and Workforce Development to support the full portfolio that I talked about before. That's a huge source of pride, and that's going to have a lasting impact in the Black community. I think the creation of $24 million in loans and grants, which is an extraordinary increase over what we were managing in the past, to support over 1,300 small businesses last year, creating the first ever African-American revolving loan fund, creating a Latino small business fund, launching our grant products in Chinatown in service to the API communities, even more important during these times as we're having this conversation around racial equity through the lens of so many diverse communities, creating $12 million of loan programs of 0% interest loans, and then repurposing all of our dollars so we could be nimble to actually serve the needs during this time. Now, that's a lot of back of the office type of stuff, but if you don't have the ability to be flexible during a time like COVID, people were not being served. And so being able to know our business, know our onions, know how things worked, we could actually serve businesses who needed our support the most during this time. That's not even including the workforce development component of around, $17 million, supporting over 18,000 workers, creating the most basic things like a website with information for both workers and businesses and nonprofits to go to during this time. So they would know not only what we were providing, but how they could get connected to state programs and federal programs. And then helping create new and innovative programs like Right to Recover, which is a $10 million program to ensure that if I'm a low-wage worker in San Francisco, and I very specifically, predominantly in the Latinx community, I'm working a low-wage job, do I really want to take the risk of getting a test and missing work if I don't have paid sick leave? And creating a program that would provide the actual amount of money for a person to be able to quarantine safely, get the food that they would need, so they wouldn't have to deal with hunger in addition to everything else, and also have their minimum wage supported for them during that time. Or nearly 4,000 individuals who benefited from that program. I think that the work with supervisors, President now Walton, and Supervisor Ronan, and at the time Supervisor Fewer, in creating a family relief fund so that immigrant workers or families who didn't have access to state and federal resources did have that resource available to them through community partnerships was extremely beneficial. And then also those individuals who did have access to those programs as well to complement what the state did as well in terms of philanthropic funding to create these programs. I'm so proud we were able to do that. Now it's a lot, but so is COVID. And being able to see that we could be present with people, that there was a voice that they could yell at times throughout this process, but we would always be with them. I'm very proud of the work that so many people at OEWD are still doing today. And I know that when they look back on this time, they're going to be very proud about what they did on behalf of community, even though it still wasn't enough. But it certainly is more than government quite often is expected to do, or that people anticipate is willing to do to support people. And that's what government's for, and I think we've done a pretty damn good job.
You're listening to Voices of the Community, which explores critical issues facing Northern California communities. This is George Coster, your host, and if you're just joining us, this episode is part of our ongoing series on the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on our nonprofits, small businesses, and local governments. Our guest on today's show is Joaquin Torres, the former director of the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development and new Assessor-Recorder for the City and County of San Francisco. Let's return to our discussion on both the impact and lessons learned from Joaquin and the team at the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development in addressing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our workforce and small businesses. So out of all of 2020 and coming into 2021, what do you feel are some of the lessons that your team has learned that could be carried forward into the recovery? Because we're slowly but surely coming back as long as we can keep the variants, if you will, the vaccinations up. And at least San Francisco is good about wearing things like masks. But what are some of the lessons learned and that could lead into the recovery? Some of your recommendations for how we come out of the pandemic and recover?
I think one of the most interesting spaces that was created was both the senior policy teams, then there were larger kind of COVID teams that would meet 3 times a week in the beginning every single night at 6:00 with the mayor, with the chief of staff, with the senior department heads, discussing what was happening with when we were creating the hotels for the first time to make sure that people could shelter in place, dealing with food security issues, dealing with the George Floyd demonstrations. And of course, we're all watching as the trial started today and seeing how our country is going to react both through its systems and also through our feelings and people. Being in tune with what was happening with people, having a space for that to actually take place. It was extremely important. As we got community learning hubs up, as we talked about new programs to serve specific communities, as we flagged issues of like, we're hearing this from community, why is it not reaching you at the top? And then making sure that those voices, those issues were being heard. So creating those spaces, huge, super simple, but a huge benefit. The other component was around reopening. How are we going to reopen? How are we going to communicate to people? I still remember the day of rushing to get to that point of when the shelter in place was going to happen before that, what felt like a deafening silence on the city when the mayor and Grant Colfax had that press conference. How were we going to communicate to people about what was going on and those industry partners to help them communicate to their stakeholders? I think having those communications channels were essential. And then the most important part, I think, was the relationships that had been built over time, that the service connections that had been established over time that were put to extraordinary and unprecedented use at a rate that I don't think any of us thought was possible in terms of communication, creating new programs, creating task force that were specifically related to community needs and fostering that work. And then also I think that where some of the gaps existed in the beginning of how we could best communicate to everybody in the city about what was happening. And I think the other piece was that I think we were done a real disservice, as many of us are reading over the weekend in the news from the former administration in terms of their lack of consistency and communication with us. That's a real thing. To have a consistent message come out of this administration, I'm of course unbiased, and of course we're living in the San Francisco bubble, but when you have people saying build back better consistently across the country, across all of these webinars, it means that someone has a vision for how government should be doing its work. And there's something you can grab onto as a point of entry to understand, well, what exactly does that mean, as opposed to what the hell is going on? What is the communication that's happening? Is the threat real or not? Why are we even arguing those points? So much of that wasted time where we had to act as a city on our own to make sure that people understood the gravity and also that we as government understood the pain that was about to be created. And from an economic standpoint, from a community standpoint, from an individual standpoint, I think that understanding how important that consistency and professionalism is for real people who work in government, who understand what it's supposed to do and making it work. Taking that for granted, I hope, is something that people understand. The other thing that I think that was positive was I think people have a deep appreciation for business now. And I mean of all sizes. We certainly don't take for granted small businesses anymore. And I think for a long time we did. And I'm hoping that the convenience that many of us love to have from our friends at Amazon and knowing now how much your personal choice could actually mean to a small business during this pandemic. I hope we keep that up. And also from a capacity side for those small businesses who've been resisting going online, I hope that they take advantage of those programs that have been created on the private side, on the government side, to help participate in the economy where people actually want to participate. And I think on the other side, seeing how we can repurpose public spaces for the benefit of the economy and for the benefit of how we feel about our cities. I took a bike ride today down to City Hall on some of the slow streets, and it was a fantastic experience. And seeing individuals out there feeling safe, fantastic experience. Seeing people being able to take advantage of our city outdoors and outside has been an extraordinary thing to witness. And also the shared spaces and closed streets during certain times that have helped communities and helped businesses survive. That's a government meeting people where they're at. And I'm hoping that many of us see that as a possible future for us. Not always specifically, but certainly as a concept that people can and should be doing more to serve the people of the city.
So of your years of working there, could you share with the audience perhaps one of your favorite stories? I know you have lots of them. Could be from housing, could be from small businesses, could be from workforce, could be from, as you mentioned a second ago, the government itself working for the people.
It's hard because there's, even now, as I step into this new role of the assessor, the density of work that was being done during that time, it still hasn't unpacked itself. And even listing what we were doing during the pandemic in terms of resources being provided, it's a pretty dense list. It doesn't even come close to the level of conversations that you would have one-on-one with people, yelling at you, screaming at you to listen, crying to you during this time, and realizing that that's what you were here for. By the grace of God, if that's what you believe in, by the grace of the universe, if that's what you believe in, I feel extraordinarily lucky, and I know many of us and the team do, that we had a job during this time and that there was a way for us to participate and do some good amidst so much uncertainty. The tone of people's voices when they're asking, what am I going to do? I think there were many conversations like that with small business owners of, I don't understand why you're doing this to us, and not being able to have an answer for them always about why this was happening to all of us. But it was, and you had to use the term, hold that space with a business owner. And I think that the level of human connections that we could have, I think, has been pretty phenomenal. People who never thought that they would be working in community. A lot of the stuff that happens in the office can be policy development that exists on paper with paid professionals who are lobbying on behalf of industry, whether it's restaurants, whether it's small businesses. But, I would ask a lot of people to get on the phone with business owners directly and call them. Like, no, I don't want to see an email. I want you to call them. They're reaching out to you, call them and find out what is going on, because I knew that them hearing those voices would change the way that they were providing services in the office or on the street. I think that seeing that take hold among so many people, I think the director of workforce, Josh Arce, watching him set up a phone line in real time to make sure that the worker hotline could come in so people knew exactly where to go for their unemployment insurance, even though that wasn't our job, right? To make sure that people knew where to go, because people didn't know where to go and they couldn't reach a real person or hear a live voice. That was so important. And I just remember, calling him up and testing the system to see if they were really going to answer. And if they didn't, how fast they would call me back. I remember him sending me a line with a picture saying, "Is this your phone number? I see Torres here. Did you just call in?" But his staff had already called me back and asked me if I had gotten what I needed from the website or if there was anything else that they could provide to me. And I think seeing that level of compassion, ingenuity, basic stuff, right? Basic, simple things actually take hold during this time with a feeling of care and humanity and desire to be of service, I think was the consistent thread that kept me going during the pandemic. And then I think, the head of the African American Chamber of Commerce, being able to have conversations with him about the importance of why we were creating the African American Loan Fund, I think was very profound for me, because I grew up in Los Angeles during the time of the Los Angeles riots, and seeing history repeat itself during George Floyd last summer, seeing history repeat itself with Breonna Taylor and so many others. I think feeling that I could participate directly with someone else who had also committed themselves to serving others, being able to have those real connections, and it's still hard to articulate, but being able to have those conversations, I'll never forget that. And I think that they won't either, because I think we felt we were collaborating in something larger than ourselves. And indeed, this whole experience has been larger than any of us, but that we were actually contributing to a greater good by doing so. And I'm deeply grateful in the midst of all this chaos and pain and fear to have been able to have those kinds of experiences.
Thank you. There was some great stories in there and images. You had mentioned earlier about some of your volunteer time, and I noticed that you're a graduate of the New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, and you're sitting on the ACT board. So in all of your copious amounts of lack of free time and the fact that arts, especially our performing arts ecosystem and economy, have been really impacted. How is that going? How is it going with regards to the arts and your experience?
The artists and people who care about them and support them are some of the most resilient people in any community, and certainly in San Francisco. The innovation that they drove, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, Deborah Cullinan, who runs that organization, helped create a program that was reported in the Chronicle and a few other places about bringing performing artists in the most creative ways to our streets and shared spaces to reinforce creative work and safe sound practices, social distancing, mask wearing, etc., in an encouraging way. Only artists could come up with that. And only artists could deal with the criticism about wanting to create a program like that and actually make it happen and have people smile, even though you couldn't really see them behind the mask. But you would know with creases in their eyes that they were. And I love that. I think arts are essential. I think that, for our city in particular, the artistic history of San Francisco is essential if we want to see culture and the economy together thrive. It sounds, cheesy, but that is the most basic component. The arts ecosystem in San Francisco is essential to our economic and cultural recovery. And artists and practitioners and leaders in that community have been so committed, so forward-thinking, even though they have been the most significantly impacted during this time because they simply can't go to work, because the theater houses can't open up, because their product can't be viewed in a dark room until now, meaning movie theaters. And I think that they were so quick to adapt, and I'll speak specifically about ACT, the pivot and moving away from, they could do one performance before the shelter in place was ordered of a great play called Tony Stone that Pam McKinnon, the artistic director of ACT, directed first in New York and then brought it to San Francisco, a great play. And immediately the shifting of how are we going to incorporate and shift our programming in a way that is accessible for students in the conservatory and as well for the actors in the San Francisco community to make sure that they have an outlet during this time, which was as equally as important as we are still here, we are still on the map, we're still content creators, and we were making that accessible. And I think people would say, I saw A Christmas Carol, that landmark production for so many years, but I saw it for the first time online in a whole new way. I think artists making those kinds of changes happen has been fantastic. Now, I know everyone still wants to be together in the dark, watching the light shine on a story that can have meaning for us. But in the meantime, these innovative models have been extraordinary. I have a friend who runs a conservatory down south in San Diego, and he's at his wit's end because of trying to maintain human connections over Zoom, in webinars, in taped productions. But people are doing it. Artists are participating in programs to create public health positive murals because we think that's important as a city. And I'm so glad that we do. And I'm deeply proud of Mayor Breed and proud to be part of a city that believes that artists should be receiving a universal basic income. So those applications are live. I can't remember the days anymore, so I don't know if it was last week.
Yeah, they just announced it last week, and then that circles back to your point about the artist core that you had created with YBCA, again, another acronym for Yerba Buena Center for the Arts, to again try to provide. It goes back to the whole Back to the Future, right, where in the Great Depression, right, we had, Roosevelt had created the National Theater Group, which was all part of the WPA program. So, are those some of the creative things that, we can think of coming out of this?
I think there's been, to a degree, as painful as this has been, a liberation of ideas that have found their time. Whether we talk about racial justice, whether we talk about arts and innovation, whether we talk about streamlining bureaucracies to better serve our city while keeping our values intact, we are finding ways to invest that is powerful for this city and the people of the city. And I think that that's the big opportunity, that any big idea, anything is on the table right now. And I think that's very exciting, especially when you've heard about ideas on the fringes, you've read about ideas that haven't found their moment, but now they're being demanded. And that's powerful. And that's exciting.
I mean, in my conversation with Wayne Hazard of Dancers Group, one of his dreams is a nice endowment, but more importantly, an office building that's converted into, a center for art, living, black box theater, administration, et cetera. So we have lots of vacant office space. I'm hoping we think outside the box that way.
Exactly. And then also going back to a poignant moment, in addition, of course, to seeing barbershops reopen, nail salons reopen. There was a great dance performance that I got to see that I just happened upon that was there on Stevenson Alley off of 6th Street in Soma. And a group of dancers with masks on just performed while around 30 people who were socially-ish distanced from each other by the restaurant, great small business, Monte Sacro off of Stevenson, were performing. And there was this extraordinary hush among the people that were there who just deeply needed to have an experience that would take them out of the hell of COVID. And you could just feel it there in this small, intimate space with these great dancers. And that's when you really got to see a bow that you hadn't seen before, because it was a mutual experience of thanks through applause from the audience and a very heartfelt "you're welcome" from the dancers. And even as an artist myself and an actor myself, I didn't really know what a bow was until I saw that. And that was really, again, another poignant moment.
It's wonderful. So is there anything I haven't asked you that you would love to talk about?
Well, I think that I touched on it a little bit, but what is exciting to me, irrespective of the lack of success at the ballot box this past November for California, is the willingness of our communities to more fervently, publicly, and in a more mainstream manner talk about and react to the issue of race and the associated disparities that are created because of race. And I think that seeing the White House in their transition team talk about racial equity as one of their 4 pillars is another extraordinary opportunity for us as a community. And in the face of so much violence and senseless, disorienting, unbelievable, yet quite believable violence against people simply because of the way they look or sound, I am deeply excited, it's not the right word, but invigorated by the demands of having those conversations and making change in government, in private industry, so that people, irrespective of race or their zip codes, can have real opportunities in any city, including San Francisco. And I think that there's another huge bright light there for us as we continue that work, and that we get to illustrate it with action of investment, action of policy, action of resources, and just change who is telling our stories right now. And I really appreciate being a voice of color that's been invited to speak with you and share my perspectives. But I do think it's important for me to say that I am a man of color, a Mexican American who deeply loves this city and this state and this country and this globe. And I'm very grateful that my voice is being lent to a larger narrative. And I'm excited to see what happens.
And do you have any words of wisdom or suggestions for Kate, who's from SF Made, Kate Sophus, who's now trying to fill your proverbial shoes?
Buckle up. I don't want to ruin any surprises because she still doesn't begin until mid-May, but she is stepping into one of the most extraordinary and fulfilling positions in the city and county of San Francisco. And it is an immense responsibility, but it is also extremely fulfilling to do that kind of work day in and day out and every moment of your life.
Thank you, Joaquin, for sharing your wonderful insights from your work in economic development, workforce development, and housing. We'll make sure that listeners have your contact information, website, social media, along with links to both the SFOEWD and, of course, the Assessor-Recorder office. And please stay safe and healthy out there as we all work our way through this very strange new normal.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Voices of the Community. You've been listening to the voice of Joaquin Torres, the former director of the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development. We wanted to end the episode with another excerpt from Joaquin's Assessor-Recorder's swearing-in ceremony as he bids farewell to both his co-workers and his 11-year legacy of work in economic and community development. To find out more about all of the support services that the San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development provides, please go to oewd.org. And while you're there, you may want to check out their COVID-19 resources for both workers and businesses.
And I'm honored, Mayor Breed, for the confidence you've placed in me as I assume these responsibilities as the Assessor-Recorder for the City and County of San Francisco. It's the fundamentals that these resources support: our schools, our firefighters, our sanitation, our economic relief efforts, our public health strategies. All of these depend on the financial foundation built through the hard work of this office, and that is a responsibility I take very seriously. I never imagined where that first meeting would lead us, Mayor Breed. I was still new to public service then, and it was only through conversation that I was aware of you. You're going to go see London? You were then the director of the African American Art and Culture Complex. When you invited me over to discuss our volunteer efforts for Martin Luther King Day in the Western Addition, you treated me with a grace, with a respect, and with a bearing that told me, you better do right by this community, Joaquin. Not much has changed about that. And I am so grateful for yet another opportunity from you to take on new challenges, knowing that this is a partnership anchored in mutual respect for and commitment to community. So thank you. Now, I know I would not be here but for my family today. All my life, by word and example, they pushed me to be the best version of myself. From my grandfather, who as a butcher rose for work before dawn each day so he could buy a home for his family and help his 3 children become an artist, a Calistoga bilingual teacher and education leader, and an amazing public servant. To my nana, who taught me the love of caring that came in a foil-wrapped package of chorizo burritos that she packed for my flights back and forth between separated parents. To my grandmother, who as a seamstress stitched her way steadily towards the purchase of a beautiful home. And to my father, who broke barriers for Latino politicians at a time when being a Mexican American was a significant hurdle for leadership. And to my mom, who after a career as a writer and journalist taught me the meaning of true courage and strength when she persisted and strived even after tragedy struck and took her sight. And to my sister, who's taught me the possibilities of starting over and starting again as she finishes her 3rd year at Hastings Law School just a few blocks away in the Tenderloin. I'm very proud of my family, my Mexican-American family, a family of teachers, artists, writers, journalists, butchers, caretakers, cooks, seamstresses, and soon-to-be lawyers for what they strive to achieve and what they continue to give back to family and to society. I'm grateful to them for raising me in an environment defined by resiliency, tenacity, possibility, and yes, public service. I'm also a very proud husband to an extraordinary artist, my wife, Rebo, who guides me through the stresses of this public service and who has shown me what it means to be loved, to love, to be wrong, to be compassionate and vulnerable. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for seeing and supporting my love for this work. I'm so fortunate to have these people in my life who have shaped my approach to public service. Not all of us can be so lucky. Not all of us can rest at night knowing that the love and care we hope for that we know is such an essential part of a productive and successful life, will be there for us when we need it most. It's that awareness and those values, principles, and ethics that my family has instilled in me that carry me through the toughest times, through the hardest of life's challenges. When I called out for help, not knowing what a future could be, not knowing if one even existed for me, it was my family that heard my call. It's that care, our shared values, our principles, and ethics that I've worked to infuse in my 11 years of public service to this city. They've given me the confidence and strength to know with every shred of my being that our communities need to be listened to, that they need to be heard. And it's those values I will bring to this new role as Assessor-Recorder. These are the values we need always, but especially today, when people are hurting so badly, so deeply, when they need and deserve to know there is a government for them that is caring and not callous, with doors that are open and not shut, a government that is accessible, effective, and accountable to you, the people that we are proud to serve.
We'd also like to thank SF Gov TV for the usage of the audio from Joaquin Torres' swearing-in ceremony as the new Assessor-Recorder for the City and County of San Francisco. For more information about the importance of economic development, please listen back to our economic development episode with Kathy Hickey, Carla Mays, and Andrea Baker in our archive section. Find out how small businesses are being incubated by listening to our conversations with Pierre from SF Made in episode 21, along with Sharon and Tim with Renaissance Entrepreneurship Center in episode 48, and Pooja and Andrea from Into Action in episode 23. To get insights into our restaurant sector's struggles, please listen to our interview with Lori from the Golden Gate Restaurant Association in episode 11, along with food entrepreneurs Jeff and Shannon from Blue Plate in episode 20, Rome from Rome's Kitchen in episode 24, Brad, Haley, and Jay from Firefly in episode 32, and Women in the Bayview, whose restaurants have become community centers, Barbara from Grotto Winery and Market in episode 38, and Kristen from All Good Pizza in episode 41. And to get the insights of what it has been like owning and operating a small gift and card shop during a pandemic, listen to our conversation with Lisa from Serendipity in episode 53. With government restrictions changing and the effort to figure out how to reopen live performances, please tune in to next week's show where we hear from the voices of Executive Director of the Left Coast Theater Company, Erica Andrecchio, and Nicole Paymont, who is both the Artistic and General Director of Opera Parallel, who share how they are dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and preparing to produce live in-person productions. We hope that you enjoyed the insights, points of view, and personal stories from the voices of changemakers and their nonprofits and small businesses featured in this series. To find out more and get engaged with the nonprofits, small businesses, and staff members featured in the series, please go to my website, georgecoster.com, and click on Voices of the Community to find links to the extended versions of these interviews and to listen to the entire series. After listening to these stories, we hope that you will consider making a donation and volunteering to provide a hand up to your fellow community members. I want to thank my associate producer, Eric Estrada, and Casey Nance at Citron Studios, along with the wonderful crew at the San Francisco Public Press and KSFP. Voices of the Community is a member of Intersection for the Arts, which allows us to offer you a tax deduction for your contributions. Please go to georgecoster.com and click on the donate link to make a donation to help us provide future shows just like this one. While you're on our website, you can enjoy our archived past shows, which feature community voices working on solutions to critical issues facing Northern California communities. And you can sign up for our newsletter to find out more about future shows, as well as shows and events from the organizations that are included in our episodes. Take us along on your next COVID walk by subscribing to Voices of the Community on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at George Coster, and we'd love to hear from you with feedback and show ideas, so send us an email to george@georgecoster.com. I'm George Coster in San Francisco, and thank you for listening.